The first computer I got, which was obviously belonging to all of us, was a Commodore 64. And, I can see you smiling. I knew that, everybody knows that computer. Most people were running Windows 95 or Windows 3.1 at the time. It was pretty late. I think I was 9 years old, so it was probably around 93, 94, right? Yeah, so pretty much Windows 3.1 days. So we were always a few years behind on each computer, which I think worked to my advantage because, with the Commodore 64, there's no kind of GUI, there's no Windows server or anything like that. And so I said to my dad, like, how do I program this? Like, how do I make it do things, right? And so he started me off. He was teaching me, just general, like programming, like patterns and how to get started with it and just the general gist. And then he gave me the giant book that it comes with, and I just started from there. And after a while, I was programming sprites appearing on the screen that I could print out on the printer, and I guess that's kind of where it took off. So 9 years old is kind of not hugely young, but I think it was a bit of an advantage for me because it kind of started an obsession that went all the way through to now, and I'm now 20 years later, I'm almost 29, so I mean, there's this whole belief system around gender, right? And it's that nature versus nurture and things like that. And I fall into the bucket of people that believe that gender is like the majority of gender as a concept is a social construct. And so I think that the way we encourage women when they're children and the way that we kind of nurture them and encourage them in different ways kind of helps put them on this path that they're not even aware they're on, they're not even aware that you've put them on, such as don't go play outside in the mud because you're wearing a pretty dress kind of, thing, it's that kind of stuff. So I honestly believe that I had Barbie dolls and I had Lego and, I had this huge kind of variety of stuff to play with. And I mean, really, I saw a TV advertisement for an inkjet printer. It was like a Canon bubble jet or something, and I just turned to my dad and I said, I want that. And he said, well, you need a computer and we don't have one, and I was obsessed with this idea of printing out pictures. And I'm wondering whether, there are some boys that are just so not interested in that and they're more interested in sports, for example, or even just drawing or being an artist. And I think the same goes for women. Not all of us are going to be interested in it, but I honestly believe that we are put on a path where we are discouraged from pursuing something that is either challenging or just doesn't fit into what our comfortable definition of gender brackets were. And my parents were always amazing about it. Whatever I was interested in, they're just like, cool, okay, let's help you have the tools in order to pursue that. So I was very lucky to have parents like that. There's a few experiences that I hopefully won't talk too long about. The first one was I was the only girl in, this was when I was 15, I believe, in the electronics elective at school. So there were probably 20 students in 2 different classes. So out of 40 students, 39 were men, and I was the only girl. So, they were awkward about partnering up to do group activities together. And, I mean, obviously, I look around the room and I see no representations of anyone like myself, right? So that was interesting. The other side of it was that just in a general term, even without just putting gender into it, I would do things like spend birthday money that friends gave me on books on HTML and CSS, right? And they would get mad at me. They're like, why are you buying a book on that? You don't even have the internet at home, because I would catch the bus to my local library and upload my website to tripod.com, with my floppy disk. And they're just like, you're wasting my money that I gave you for your birthday, and so people thought I was really strange because I was blogging and doing things like that before it was kind of recognized as even a career path, I guess. So as I said before, I'm a front-end developer for Zappos.com during the day, so that's my sort of full-time stuff. But in my spare time, I kind of split it between a lot of different things. The reason why I was late for this hangout was because I had a board meeting. I'm on the board for a hackerspace in Las Vegas, so I helped do the marketing for that and the kind of the general operations. So I go to board meetings and boring things like that. But I mean, it's kind of fun to go to a board meeting for a hackerspace, though, when you think about it. So I got into 3D printing in 2009 before most people really kind of understood what it was, even though it's been around since the 80s. And I make a jewelry line that's 3D printed, so I don't know whether people can see, but that's a ring there. And so that's one of my rings. I have an Etsy shop on the side. And I'm kind of one of the 3D printing evangelists in Las Vegas. So I speak at a lot of tech career schools and middle schools and high schools and universities about how awesome 3D printing is, how it's, you know, sparking industrial revolution and stuff like that. And yeah, I tinker with my 3D printer at home, which is super fun. So that was why I brought my 3D printer to the hackathon, because I feel like it's this kind of extra limb that I take with me everywhere. So that's kind of what I'm into right now, I guess. Yeah. There's kind of a chicken and the egg thing here, right? It's, I don't know whether you can say it's chicken and egg or catch-22, where you need women to see themselves being represented in a field a lot of the time in order to help give that confidence that they belong somewhere and that they're capable. You know, we look at systemic oppression in lots of different things, such as race as well as gender. And if you don't see yourself represented, you can't see yourself actually wanting to strive for that, even if you're interested in it. So you assume, as a result of whatever makes you fit into that minority, that's the reason why you don't belong there. But how do you get more women in if they don't feel confident enough to get in there, I guess? So what we need to do is, for those women in the field who are actually comfortable with it, you know, they need to be speaking out and blogging and making themselves very kind of public and very approachable in order to help encourage that. I like to do a lot of that stuff. I like to make sure that I'm present at tech events and things like that, just to show that just because you don't see yourself represented doesn't mean that you can't try and make it in a technology or a STEM field. So the weird thing is that most of my education and also most of kind of the activism that I'm either involved in or like to kind of read about is actually on Tumblr, which sounds really weird. But you know, there's a huge demographic on Tumblr that is female as well, so it's kind of a good platform to start with. But I follow a lot of kind of feminist Tumblrs online, and as well as body positive and all sorts of different kind of social activism. That's been really good for me because they tend to pick out the really good articles. There's also some really great people online on Twitter who I follow too. I should really send you a list because I don't know everyone off the top of my head, but I'm more than happy to send a list. And I find just things like the ADA initiative. There's also one relating to Grace Hopper, where it's a scholarship to go and attend a conference but also do boot camps. Things like Hacker School, things like the Etsy engineering initiative, which, you know, strives to get that gender balance and runs women coding conventions and things like that. There's a wonderful woman in New York who runs Girl Develop It. She kind of started it off. She is amazing, and just things like that. I mean, I would strongly recommend people find the Women in Tech meetups as well in their towns. So we have Girls in Tech Las Vegas, which is run by Amber, Bradley, and Christina, and they're amazing. So feminism to me is, I mean, it really is this very simple definition for me. And then it gets kind of more and more complicated from there. So, you know, really at the end of the day, it's about women having access to the same rights, the same privileges, and the same kind of opportunities that that men are actually afforded, you know, and take for granted every day that we don't always have access to. And so you think about things like the vote and, you know, being able to own a house in your name without a male guarantor, and you think of really kind of big things that were done for us in the past. And you know, that was just the beginning. That were the things that you could make the biggest fuss about, because you could honestly see that they were kind of the biggest forms of inequality, right? And now going forward, we're starting to look at the more subtler things, the more subtle forms of misogyny in our society. And right now, what's most relevant to me in feminism is that trying to dismantle really toxic spaces for women, such as online, where we're kind of treated pretty badly online in general, and on online gaming communities. As well as just educating people of women's capabilities. I honestly believe that there's still this breakdown where people assume that if a woman does the same job as a man, that she's just not as capable, or she's not as deserving of promotions and achievements, and she's not looked up to as much. And I think that that's important, as well as getting intersectionality into things. So, for example, a white female such as myself has a completely different experience within feminism and then within misogyny that a black woman does, for example, and trying to recognize the differences and trying to help each other out and dismantle it, rather than having it become the oppression Olympics. So feminism to me right now is trying to recognize that we all have different experiences, and that feminism is meant to cover all of those experiences and help get opportunities for all women to actually finally get towards equality. There was also a study, I think they've done this numerous times actually, where they will give the subjects like a paper, and you need to kind of grade the paper, and it'll be just like thorough research on a specific topic, or it could be a thesis. And what they'll do is that they will give two different groups the same paper, but they'll actually change the name on the top as to who was the author. So they'll have a very kind of generically female name, such as Jane Doe, and then they'll have James Smith, for example. And the groups overall will rate the paper more highly if they think that a man wrote it. And so you kind of see that direct bias happening over and over again. But then things like that IQ stuff proves otherwise completely. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy, and it's those kind of biases, those really subtle biases, that I believe kind of should be our focus from now on, because they're the things that people get away with the most, and they're actually the most unaware that they're doing it as well. And so helping to dismantle that and helping people critically think about the way that they see the world is kind of important in just getting rid of that last kind of attitudes that are hanging around, What they've done is they've looked at activities online, and they've found that although a lot of men comment that they get a lot of nasty comments on blog posts or Twitter kind of articles or anything that they post, they'll get negative reactions on, particularly if it's political, right? But then they've studied that, and they've just seen there's an exponential number of threats and harassment and awful comments that women receive, even if they write on similar subjects, right? So it's true that everyone online is subject and vulnerable to kind of, trolls and anonymous people who think that, it's an awesome thing to death threat people and harass them and do things like that. But women do actually suffer from, an exponential amount of that stuff. And, I have girlfriends who play online on say, Xbox Live servers and things like that. And if the groups find out she's female, they'll either kick her out of that game that they're multiplayering on, or they will start being sexually suggestive and sexually harassing her to the point where she doesn't want to be playing the game anymore. And so, things that are kind of seen as, oh, that's just boys being boys, is very much accepted online. And just because it's been a thing that's happened, a lot of people tell me, well, that's how the world works, that's how the internet works. But that's not really, the acceptance that we should be having, because I don't know whether you've been following the Anita Sarkeesian kind of stuff, where Anita Sarkeesian is a critical game reviewer. She looks at tropes, particularly female tropes in video games, and she criticizes them. And all she does is just criticize them. She's not trying to take anyone's games away, and she has had her Wikipedia page defiled with really awful pictures of herself that have been photoshopped. Someone created a game where you could beat her up, and it would Photoshop her face so that she was cut and bloodied and all sorts of things like that. And all she did was just say, hi, games are kind of harmful to society's image of women, and this is why. and she's just had the most unbelievable amount of awful treatment directed at her. For does not deserve that at all. So I guess they're the kind of things that we see. I think a lot of the kind of opportunity on the internet, especially online, comes from the fact that you can be anonymous, right? And so, I've seen artists do kind of public artworks where they are actually the artwork, and people can do whatever they want to that artist without consequence. And they'll do awful things to that person standing in the public space, and then as soon as the artwork is over and they reanimate, everybody runs away because they realize that all of a sudden they're accountable for those actions. And I think that removing accountability kind of shows as a society what we're willing to accept if we can't pin it on somebody and have them actually suffer consequences as a result. It's going to be a lot of hard work, right? I mean, I think that what you said about boys will be boys, and what your father said was very profound as far as this goes, because that really is how you should be treating people, and we shouldn't be giving people excuses based on loose constructs of like what that person should represent in society, right? Such as boys will be boys. I think the thing is that when you have things like freedom of speech, particularly in America, freedom of speech is something that I understand it's completely valuable, and we should have it. However, people mistake freedom of speech for being able to say and do what you like without actually having anyone be critical of what you've said, and also not being accountable for it. So if you've done something incredibly harmful, particularly to a minority or someone who is vulnerable, and I mean kicking someone when they're down, I guess you could say, that person should be accountable. That person should absolutely be criticized. And I think that whatever you say, you should actually be welcome to that too, because learning how to treat people better isn't something you should take personally. If someone calls you out for something, that's an opportunity for you to educate yourself and actually become a better person. And I think wanting to be a better person shouldn't be the result of a religion or a government law that's put in place. It should be how you feel as a person, and knowing that the better we are to each other, the better that community and society will actually develop, like economically and otherwise as well. So the first thing I would recommend is do a scout around your area, either on Yelp or meetup.com, to try and find women-friendly events. There's usually got to be at least kind of one women in engineering meetup in your city. If there isn't one, then think about starting one, or hopefully one will start up soon. The other side of that is to find yourself a mentor. Find yourself a mentor who's a woman who you look up to, is already being successful in the field that you want to pursue in STEM or tech, and lean on them and learn from their experiences, and also get them to set goals with you, so that if you want to have the courage, for example, to go to a hackathon, that is a completely legitimate goal, and it is legitimately terrifying to go to your first one if you're not feeling confident, right? So having a mentor who believes in you, and having someone to look up to that represents you, is probably the most important thing that I can recommend for sure. I had that in high school with my media studies teacher. It started there, and I continually try and find mentors that I look up to hang out with.